I'm Dr. John Zeisel. I believe that staying engaged in our communities, that continuing to learn, and that knowing we can make a difference, hope, are the secrets of successful aging. Welcome to Hopeful Aging. The mission of this program is to create a life worth living for all of us as we age, including those facing cognitive challenges, by enriching life and offering hope. My guest today is Steve Moran. He is the publisher of an online magazine called Senior Housing Forum. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, you really are an influence in this field. A lot of people and a lot of important people in the field of senior housing, that's what it's called,
right.
Read your blog every day, which is a real effort.
It's a labor of love, so it doesn't feel like much of an effort.
But we're going to get back to the labor of love issue because that's very important.
Perfect.
But when you write, first of all, what is a publisher who doesn't publish books and magazines? And second of all, what is senior housing? Is it every place we all live? Or what are we really talking about here?
So great questions. The website is really designed, so I want to start by saying that my target audience is people and companies who own and work in the business of providing senior living. And I define senior living as independent living, which we generally think of as an apartment building that has some services, meals, maybe housekeeping, laundry, those kinds of things, some activities. Assisted living for people who need more help. Memory care for people who have dementia. And I would include skilled nursing or nursing homes as part of that process. And so my goal is to publish articles that help people who are caring for seniors, who are providing housing for seniors, do a better job. And a better job mostly means giving them a higher quality of life.
So on the one hand, you're writing this for people who provide the services. Obviously, the quality of life of the people who live there and work there is really what you're engaged with.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by quality of life? You say, everybody uses this term. I want to have a better quality of life. So when you say you're working on helping these places, which could include a continuing care retirement community,
absolutely,
that includes all those types.
Yep.
And you want to increase the quality of life for people living in these places, what does that mean to you?
So it's a great question, and the reason I like it so much is there's been sort of this thinking that senior living ought to be like a luxury cruise ship or a five-star hotel, right?
That sounds pretty good to me.
It sounds pretty good, right? But let me ask you a question. So if I came to you and I said, John, my great uncle owns Carnival Lines, which he doesn't, and he's given me some free passes to go on and around the world cruise, and I just really like you, and I want to give you one of those passes or two passes for you and your wife to go. What would you say?
I'd say, can I cook my own meals because I like to cook?
Oh, you're a spoiler here.
I'd say, can I see my kids while I'm going around because I like to see them? Can I do all the things that I've been on a cruise ship and a week was enough for me.
Yeah, so that's my point. So my point is that for most people, the idea of having a cruise, and particularly if you've been working hard, you go, oh man, you put me on a cruise ship and I get to do that. That is going to be cool.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is if I told you that you were going to go live on a cruise ship and you were never going to get off again, how would you feel about it?
Forget that.
You'd hate it, right?
I wouldn't even get near the loading dock or whatever.
That's right.
Ramp.
That's right. We know for sure, there's good research data that tells us that people who live with purpose, who live a mindful life, live longer, happier, healthier lives. And in particular, we know that there's lower rates of cognitive decline. We know they live longer, and we know they're happier. And so the goal really is to help the senior living industry move beyond this luxury hotel cruise model motif for senior living and really get to the point where we're saying to seniors as they move into these communities, this is the next chapter in your life, and it might very well be the best chapter.
So you're talking about the fact that a cruise ship doesn't necessarily give you, over the long term, mindful purposeful life.
Exactly.
So does that help your body? Does it help your, what does it help if you have that?
Well, it helps everything.
What do you mean, what's everything?
It gives me a reason to wake up in the morning. It gives me we seem to be hardwired to feel better, to do better when we're helping other people.
Yes.
You know, everybody thinks that you want to go on a vacation, sit around and do nothing. And I would argue that there are times when people really need that.
So where did you learn this lesson, which is a pretty important lesson in life for all of us?
Oh man, it sort of come to me over time. I guess the place where I really saw it first come about was that a number of years ago, I lived in Southern California, and I actually ran a high school, junior high school church group.
Oh, great.
So it seems like a funny place to go when we're talking about senior living, right? But I think the application is really good.
Right?
And so one of the things I used to do with these young people is during spring break, I'd take them down to Mexico, and we would build typically a school or a church, and we'd go into the schools and we'd teach English. And this was really primitive living. I mean, you might think, oh, Mexico, Mazatlan, or Acapulco, where you live in a luxury hotel. It wasn't like that. It was living in canvas tents and 40 people using one outhouse. And when you take a bath, you'd go to a 55-gallon drum full of water that wasn't all that clean, and you dip a coffee can in it and dump it over your head, scrub up, and then dump some more water over your head and clean up. And by the time we were done with the week, everybody was exhausted. I mean, people were dirty and exhausted. But they could turn around and they'd look and they'd see this building that they had built with their own hands.
Right.
And so one of the things I'd sometimes ask kids, I said, okay, imagine now that you've got another week of vacation. And I'm going to give you two choices.
The cruise ship or do this again?
Exactly. I usually use Hawaii, but I said you can go to Hawaii for a week, or you can go back to Mexico and live in a sleeping bag,
right,
and use a stinky outhouse and work hard all day. And I'm going to give you those two choices. Which one would you rather do? And I would tell you that virtually to a teen, they would rather go back to Mexico because they just came back feeling so energized that they had done something that was useful, that was purposeful.
So you got turned on to this idea by being useful,
That's
seeing
right.
other people be useful, and that's the kids in Mexico. What about in senior living, as you call it? What might be, have you seen something like that in senior living where we could say, great, now let's transfer this important work and giving to others into senior living?
Yes.
Ever?
Yeah, so I want to actually give you two stories.
Okay.
The first one, and this really got my juices going, is that there's a senior living community in the Chicago area, and they managed to actually connect with a English language school in South America. I don't remember which country it was in. And what the school was teaching high school students, college students who were trying to learn English so that they could get better jobs and grow their lives. And what they really needed was the ability to have conversations with people who are English language speakers, native speakers,
Just
right?
conversation.
Just conversation. Yeah,
Right.
it didn't have to be teaching. It just had to be,
Right.
like we're talking right here. And so what they did is they connected via some sort of a Skype with a special overlay that they used to help the teachers do teaching. And they developed these beautiful, beautiful friendships between the seniors in the community and the students, and so these seniors, and it could be done by somebody who's in a nursing home, which is lots and lots of ways to do it.
Doesn't matter whether you're in a nursing home,
That's
you
right.
can speak English and help people.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So the other one, and this is so
By the
cool
way, I
to
want
me.
you to tell you, I'm very glad I can help you with this, and your English is excellent.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I was hoping that would be the case. So the other one is in some sense even more inspiring to me, and that's that there was a guy who was a photographer in Southern California. He did some freelance. I think he worked for the LA Times, and his father had dementia. And so our first thought is, well, you can't really do purposeful living with people who have dementia or Alzheimer's, right? Because they have such, everybody knows they have such limited capabilities.
And as everybody knows who watches this program, that's the whole point. Everybody has capabilities. We just have to find out what they are.
That's right. Well, he wasn't smart enough to know that they didn't have potential. So what he did is he got 5 other photographers, professional photographers, and they went into 5 dementia-specific senior living communities. They put the cameras in the hands of residents, and the photographer worked one-on-one with the residents, and they did a whole bunch of photographs that were a day in the life. And so, of course, they came back with thousands and thousands of pictures.
Right.
But they'd been curated and helped along. They sat down and they picked 50 of the best pictures. They framed them.
Wow.
They put them on a wall at a gallery in Los Angeles, and they invited the community in, and then they sold these photographs, and they raised about $5,000 for the Alzheimer's
That's great.
Association.
So a bunch of different things. First of all, going backwards, they gave something away to a worthy organization.
Absolutely.
Secondly, they didn't just put every 1,000 photographs up, they curated an exhibit.
That's right.
Which is a very respectful thing to do.
That's
Whether
right.
it's Picasso or not, you have to decide which is going in and why.
Exactly.
Framing them, not just putting a little Scotch tape on the wall, shows respect and dignity to those people.
Clearly.
And if they came to the gallery, which is an official public place, they felt good. They felt different about
That's right.
themselves.
That's right.
This is brilliant thing to do, isn't it?
It was a brilliant thing to do. And I guess the last thing, and I don't know that they really expected this to happen,
Yes.
but the last thing is the family members just continued to talk about it, because for many of them, they saw new life in their loved one with dementia that they'd never seen before. They never thought was possible. And so
Yes.
it just renewed their hope and their faith, and it built the relationships. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what else do we have but the relationships with each other?
And that's the definition of who we are. which
That's right.
those
It is really the
relationships.
definition of who we
and,
are.
And you talked about they had hope. What they realized was that someone, by doing something, could make a difference in their life.
Absolutely.
And in the life of their loved ones.
That's
and
right.
that the stigma that they were part of, they can't, was being lifted because
That's right.
they can.
Yeah.
And that's really, those stories are the apocryphal stories that are really important to use to demonstrate people can do things and you can do something to help others. So now my question, of course, is, you're a preacher in the senior housing.
I am
senior
a
living
preacher in the
industry.
senior living world. Absolutely.
Also because of your spiritual background. Why doesn't everybody do this? What's so difficult about getting online with some kids in Mexico and teaching them English, or giving out iPhones or disposable cameras and taking a lot of pictures and doing this? It's just concern and interest and creativity and time. Why doesn't this happen in every senior living setting that you and I have anything to do with?
So I think there are several reasons, but I think that the one that's most difficult to overcome is just the problem of inertia. If I'm running a senior living community, whether it's assisted living, memory care, independent living, or even skilled nursing, and my residents are happy, and my family members are happy.
Or happy enough.
So let me carry this a little bit further.
Okay.
So my residents are happy. My staff is reasonably happy.
Yes.
My families are happy with the care I'm giving. My building is full enough that I'm making a decent rate of return. And then somebody like Steve Moran comes along and writes an article and says, well, why don't you go do this thing?
Yes.
It's really hard because we have this inertia to keep doing what we've been doing because we know it's at least successful at a level.
At least successful at a level, which for most of us is good enough.
That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
How happy are you with your life? I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
Why don't you change this and change this and change this? Because I'm pretty happy.
Well, and change is scary.
And change is scary. Why not? I mean,
It's
I'm just
risky,
saying.
and it's risky. It's not just scary, it's risky, right?
Because you're not sure that if I now change something in my life, become a vegetarian or take vacations more often or whatever it is, that I'm going to be happier. I don't know.
It might get worse, right?
It might get worse. So
That's
you're
right.
taking a risk. If you've got a thing that works and you want to add something new, you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
So the first one is, people are not all happy to always take risks, just maybe because things will get better.
Yeah. I think there's another thing, though,
Okay.
that I think is really important and sometimes we miss. So if you go look at the history of Apple,
Yep.
they did not invent the smartphone and they did not invent the tablet, right? There were other companies who did that, but it just didn't appeal. The unique genius of what Steve Jobs and Apple did was they were able to say, I see this thing, but I realize I can dream in my head that it could be so much more. And he envisioned that, he invented it, and voila, instead of a few people using smartphones and tablets, everybody had to have one. And so I think that sometimes, particularly if things are working okay, we just have a hard time seeing that there could be a next level. We think that that's about as good as we can get. When in reality, maybe it's probably okay because it's working, right? So it's hard to argue, but hard to imagine what it would be like when you're up here.
So that's sort of interesting. So even if you or I or somebody or this television program demonstrates what could work. We had, for example, at one point we interviewed somebody who did wonderful dance movement things, and it was very interesting, and I don't know how many people who watched it said immediately we have to do more dance movement.
Right.
Right? Because even seeing it doesn't necessarily get your brain saying, I can make a better iPad than the other guy.
That's right.
Right, or tablet. Right.
Right.
So we got inertia, we got risk averseness.
Right.
We've got the limits to our imagination
Exactly.
because we're doing okay and
Yep.
we're not forced by circumstance to change.
That's right.
I think there's another piece which is it's not so easy to do it even if it seems easy. Because I said, oh, it's so easy, why don't we do it? Do you agree with that?
Oh, I think it's really, really tough. There are things that seem easy and aren't. So I'm going to give you an example in the world of marketing,
Sure.
because it really hit home for me. So one of the things that I did a series of articles on was I'd walk into buildings, sort of do a mystery shop thing and ask for a tour, and more often than not, it was not a great experience. And I was recently at a senior living community. I was actually attending a function there, and I had some time, and they had another part of the community, their assisted living unit, that I wanted to go visit. So
Right.
and I know the owner well, I know the management, and I know their philosophy is just customer service, customer service, customer service every time. So I walked into the building. I expected things were going to be great. Walked up at the front desk. There were two people there. Said, "Hi, my name is Steve Moran. I'd just like to get a little bit of information, maybe take a short tour." And the woman who was in charge looked up at me and she said, "Well," long hesitation, she said, "I guess we could do it, but we're really, really busy now. So why don't you have a seat, and maybe in 20 minutes we'll get to you."
Oh, good.
And I was just horrified, and so I kind of didn't know what to say, and I didn't really have that much time to wait. And I said, "Well, I'll just come back later." And so here we are. We have somebody where the whole organization is
Yes.
totally committed to that not happening, and yet this really bad thing happened.
Yes.
Because it's so hard. We get into these patterns and we get busy, and it's a lot easier to do what we've always done than to make
But
change.
that's the inertia.
That is
See,
the inertia.
I think one of the things that's hard is really to figure out whether or not the photographer is there, the son who's a
Right.
photographer, and to get him to go outside and do something for his parent, but then say it's really for everybody. It's not so easy to figure out these things as I would like to think they are.
Yeah, well, I think it's really tough. I think that so one of the things I would tell you is I think that just about every senior living community that I go into,
Yes.
or operator provider that I talk to, is doing a few things to create purpose and give back.
Yes.
Oftentimes they'll do things relative to, say, backpacks at the beginning of school, or they'll do a Christmas fun, or those kinds of things.
Yes.
But they're just once or twice a year, and so they don't really create the culture. And I think a lot of it is because they don't really know what to do. There aren't great resources. There are lots of
Yes.
great resources about how to do. I mean, everybody sort of does Bible studies and bingo and birthdays, right? and entertainment. And I've seen some things that I look at where they're having people do things that, as adults do things that you probably wouldn't even ask a first grader to do,
Yes.
and it's kind of demeaning. And I don't think they're bad people. I think that they really are trying to do a good job.
So you said something in passing that I think
Okay.
hits the kernel of what we're talking about, which is it's not a matter of doing an activity. It's a matter of changing or adopting a culture.
That's right.
Where the kind of thing you're saying is part of everyday thinking. So that instead of saying we have an activity from 10 to 11, an activity from 3 to 4, and we have an activity director, it's somebody who says, how do we create a community and be part of this where every day we're thinking, what can we do interesting, like bring the photographer in? Or what can we do out there to help people in Mexico? That it's a culture of a community,
That's right.
not just we want to see more activities.
Yeah, so part of it
And it's
comes
hard
down
to change culture.
And it's hard to change culture. And part of it becomes me coming to you and figuring out what your core excellence is. So, I get to know you, and one of the things that I think you'd be really good at if you were living in my senior community, I think you'd be a great teacher.
Thank you.
Right? And so I'd come to you and I'd say, hey, John, why don't you teach a class on, so what would you teach a class on?
Oh, boy.
I know.
Well, I could teach a class on organizing the environment so that it meets your needs. Sort of how do you change your apartment, or how do you change the
Yeah.
living room so that you really feel comfortable there and what you want to get done? Because that's my background. My background
Right.
is sociology and people and buildings, so I went back there. Or because my hobby is cooking,
Right.
I could teach a cooking class.
That's right, yeah. Yeah.
Now,
So,
how do you make a good meal from nothing? That's part of my...
yeah. So,
Actually, one second. I have a dream.
Okay.
I have a dream.
Great. I wanna
and
hear
that
it.
is that on those cooking shows that I watch every so often,
Yep.
they have a program called Leftovers and the Everyday Person. And they fill a kitchen or a refrigerator with whatever people have been eating for a week, and they say to me, you have to make the best meal you can with those leftovers. That's my dream would be to do that.
So imagine you could somehow do this in the context of a senior living community. Maybe at a CCRC where you've got some independent living people and they still
Right.
have it. And so you throw this event where
Oh,
you invite people
you got me
to
going
bring,
on this.
you invite people to bring all their leftovers into the kitchen. And you're there, and they bring their leftovers, and you got all the stuff on the counter, and the cameras are going because you're broadcasting it, and then you start having this conversation with people, and so it's not just you doing it, but all of a sudden you've engaged your fellow residents, and you know where the staff is?
They're watching.
That's right.
They're-
They're on the sidelines.
Yeah,
that's
no,
right.
that's right. They're
That's
not
right.
going to.
That's right.
Stay out of my way. I'm cooking here.
Exactly. And
Right.
so think about how you'd feel about that day if you were living there and you'd been able to teach. Because what would you? The thing is, you wouldn't really be teaching people about cooking. This is sort of a head fake thing, right?
What would I be teaching
You'd
people
be
about?
teaching people about creativity,
Yeah, right.
Right.
Because that's
and
what
that's
it really,
and that's really the magic, right?
the magic is that if you are creative enough, you can take anything
Yeah.
and turn it into something that everybody can enjoy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
So that's really wonderful, and I'm going to take back with me this when I get much older. I'm going to do this. So it's not just finding out that I was born in July or that my marriage was in the spring. It's finding out something deeper about me. This creative part. It's their passion, right?
Well, I want to tell you about a friend of mine.
I like
This kind of
stories.
this
I
is
like
kind of
stories.
this kind of is a story that it's a teachable moment because it's kind of depressing to me. So there's this guy, and I'm going to call him Bill. I'm not going to use his real name here
Please.
because he might watch this.
Right.
His name
Hopefully.
is Bill. His name is Bill, and he's in his 80s, and he's in a church, an adult class that I teach in my church.
Uh-huh.
And as people are coming into the class, I typically say, how was your week? And Bill would, every week, he'd say, it was the same. I said, did you do anything exciting? No. Anything exciting? Everything's the same. And after about 6 weeks of this, I'm really working hard because everybody's got some story to tell. And he's got no story to tell. And he finally stops and he says, well, I live in a retirement community. And so I just do the same thing every day.
Right.
I eat my meals, I get dressed, and that's it. And so there's nothing exciting ever happens. And it just about crushed me.
Yes.
I hardly knew how to react. It was so horrible.
Yes, yes.
And so afterwards, I talked to his children who were really happy with there, and I said, "But he doesn't seem to be doing anything." She says, "No. Well, they come in and they ask him if he wants to do anything, and he says no, and so he just stays in his room and he reads, and
Yes.
but we're really happy as the children because." He's kept safe in his medication and his food and his laundry and all those kinds of things.
Basic needs are met.
Basic needs. That's not living?
No.
Is that would you want to live doing nothing? Or I came to you and said, how was your week? I mean, you picked me up this morning and I said, how was your week? And you had this long story about what's going on in your life right now.
Right.
And that was cool because that's
That's
humanity.
living.
That's
That's
living.
living.
And so on one hand, you could say, well, person-centered care says you ask him, Bill, what he wants to do, and he says, I want to
There's
say.
a term, let me just, for the audience members, there's a term called person-centered care, which came into being 20 years ago, which focuses on saying we must pay attention to the person. And that's been so overused,
Well, and
we don't
most-
even know what that means
Yeah,
anymore.
so more specifically, what it means is that whatever the person wants is what they should get.
Got it.
The challenge with that is what happens if what they want is not good for them?
That's a good question.
And this is a big struggle, because I'm not talking about forcing people to do things, but I happen to know Marvin has got a deep spiritual faith. I happen to know that he's got some interest in politics. And so imagine what it would be like if we went to him and said, rather than saying, why don't you come and sit in our current events class, why don't you come down and actually teach this class?
Yes.
Why don't you come and teach a Bible study? Would you, or come and help and teach a Bible study? So now we've given him purpose, we've given him a reason, we've said to him, we need you. You're an important part of this community. You're going to make this place where you live better.
Or if he's interested in politics, watch debates among politicians and presidential candidates and commentary on it and run a discussion.
That's right. I mean, there's so many
Right.
things he could be asked to do, where I know for sure that if he were asked to come help, he'd say, sure, I can do that.
So we've talked about the religious, we've talked about politics, we've talked about my cooking. I'm using the word passion because it seems to me that what you're saying is we got to go back beyond what do you like to something that when you ask me those questions, I get excited
That's
about
right. Yeah.
because I'm
Yeah.
passionate about it.
Yeah.
And how many people that you know and how many organizations do you know where when you walk in and you say, what do you find out about people? Let me ask you a question. Do any of them say we want to find out what their passion is? And maybe some, I hope, if they listen to you.
I'm sure there are some. In fact, I was recently at a CCRC community where they work really hard at that. But I think that it's easy for you and me to do this because
Right.
we have two things. One is we're very passionate people,
Yes.
and we know what our passions are.
Because we spend time working on it.
Because
We're
we spend
working
time
for
working
ourselves
on it.
in a sense.
Yeah. And so I think that the challenge people has is a lot of times I don't think people even working in the industry exactly know what their passion is. And the other thing is the passions, if you're really expressing your passion, you're kind of living your life with abandon, which means you might look silly and foolish.
And we don't want to look
people
silly
don't-
and foolish.
Exactly.
So let's end this program with advice to some people who are watching.
Okay.
And some of them might be running these programs. CCRC, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is Continuing Care Retirement Community. So there are people who run these programs with every type of senior
That's
living
right.
alternative.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to a family member who says, I want, or a person who's might move into assisted living or a program like that, whether or not they have a cognitive challenge or the beginning of one, what advice would you give them so that they find the place that has these kinds of programs, that has these, where do they begin? Do they walk in and say, are you going to ask me about my passion? That and a lot of money will get you a cup of coffee in most places now.
Yeah, it's a tough question,
Yeah.
honestly. It really is a tough question. So I guess the place I would start would be to spend a little time saying they ought to explore, for the person who's moving in, what their passions are and to think about that. And to the extent that they can figure that out going into it, it gives them some tools. So let's say
if I'm going into a place, I say, what are the kinds of questions you're going to ask me? And if they say, when were you born and what were you doing? That's different than if they say, what really is meaningful to you?
Well, you're maybe more hopeful than I am because I'm not sure there are many buildings that would actually start with those
Right.
questions. They should.
Right.
But let's say that I know that I'm your son. Probably wouldn't that quite work out in reality, but I'm your
and
son,
we're
and
role-playing.
I'm helping you find a new senior living community, right?
Right.
And so one of the things I know is that your passion is on cooking.
Right.
So part of what I'm going to go look for is I'm going to walk in, and we're going to walk in together. Really, I'm not doing it for you.
No, we're walking
But we're going to
together.
walk in together, and one of the things that we want to explore is, my dad, John, here, he loves to cook, and he still wants to be able to do some cooking from time to time. Is that something he could do? Could he even teach? And so asking those kinds of questions. But even more fundamental than that is I'd really want to walk in and say, so I don't really want just a cruise ship model. You tell me you're like a cruise ship, but I'd like to be able to actually have some purpose and meaning for my life. what is it in your community that's going to make sure that I actually am going to do things that are meaningful in my life every week? Every day would be ideal,
Right.
but at least every week, so that I can actually have purpose and meaning. It's not just fluff.
So one of them is saying to them, not passion, because that's a term that might be, people might not understand
That's
or
right,
might not
yeah.
grasp, but to say, how am I going to have meaning in my life, or my father, or my spouse,
That's
or
right.
whatever it is? And the other thing, of course, in order to do that, you've got to do a little introspection.
Yeah.
You've got to walk in having some sense of what that might be, or what
That's
that
right.
might mean to
That's
you.
right. But I want to be careful about
Okay.
that, because one of the things that I have heard is, and this is, to me, this is when senior living is at its very best. I have heard stories of seniors moving into a senior living community, making a new friend who's doing, say, something like woodworking, and never have done any woodworking before.
This is very interesting. Absolutely, really good point.
And then discovering that they've got this passion and this love for this thing that they'd never done before.
Absolutely. That's such an important point, which is just because we used to do something doesn't mean that that's what we want to continue doing. Because the real issue is to learn and to
That's right.
explore and
Yeah,
to discover.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some, I'm seeing a few communities that are starting to do what they call university programs. So they're classes, and the idea is that they'll take classes and they'll teach classes and they'll explore new things. And the opportunities are massive. I'm
Yes.
actually working on a talk right now of 22 things that senior living communities can do to create passion and meaning for both residents and staff. We haven't really talked about staff, but staff is a big part of this.
So is that something that you might end up publishing on your blog?
Very likely, very likely.
So at the end of this program, by the way, there is a link to your website.
Perfect.
And so for those of them who are interested, they can just get on that website, sign up, and when that list of 20, which I'm going to sign up for,
Right.
are ready, I'm going to be sure to read them, and
Perfect.
and maybe we'll meet you again. Steve, thank you
Perfect.
so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me,
This
John. I
was
appreciate it.
A wonderful opportunity and wonderful conversation. And to all of you, thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this program. And we look forward to seeing you again on Hopeful Aging.